I,
Okay, how you
I
doing, Barry?
here, yes. I'm
Perfect.
doing great. I'm having
Go.
a great day here out on in the Campbell Highlands, Southern Indiana, having a great day.
Good. Hello, Michael. Hello, Richard.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi, Richard.
Hi.
Now I'm here in Virginia in peace, and I'm just going to sit back and watch because of the lag there is. I don't want to cause trouble. So if there's anything I want to throw out there, I'll probably go, ooh, ooh.
We'll be listening for the ooh ooh.
That sounds good. Okay, I'm going to mute myself meanwhile so I don't make more trouble.
So, Barry, how are things there? I know you do beekeeping and woodwork. What are some of your most recent projects you've done?
Well, let's see. As soon as we get done with this, I'm going to be grabbing some lunch, and then I came out of winter with a very strong beehive. This is going into my second year of beekeeping, and I was very fortunate that my bees survived the winter. And we didn't have a very rough winter, so it was pretty good. Bees came out very strong, and so last Friday I went out and split my hive, my single hive, into two hives. That means I took half the bees and put them in one box and left the other half in the other box. Unbeknownst to me, throughout the week, we had 2 nights where it was below freezing here in April in Southern Indiana. And I am just paranoid that when I go out today and I open up the hives and look in, I just am keeping my fingers crossed that my bees were able to survive those 2 nights. Now, bees can survive freezing weather because they form a cluster or a ball in the middle of the hive and keep each other warm. But I split one large cluster into 2 small clusters. And so I'm just hoping that, fingers crossed, that my bees came through that. I'll know this afternoon, and I'll either have a drink to celebrate or have a drink to commiserate. But you can see there's drinking involved this afternoon. But the bees, I had you don't usually get honey the first year, but my bees were so strong, and so my queen was so active that I got 35 pounds of honey at the end of the summer last year. Yeah, it was, that equates to about 2.5 gallons of honey, because honey's pretty heavy. So it was, and everybody, I gave it all away, friends and relatives, and everybody just loved it, but they ran out so quick because all I had was that. So hopefully, if I did it right and I didn't kill them, I've always told people that my whole job as a beekeeper is just not to kill the bees, because bees have been surviving on their own for 50,000 years without me. So there's a chance I did, but I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that I didn't. Hopefully, if both hives survive, then I'll be at the end of this summer. I could get as much as maybe 100 or 150 pounds of honey out of 2 hives this year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that goes. And it's been so much fun learning. I mean, that's one of the things that I enjoy doing more than anything else, is learning, and learning about how to beekeep and about bees themselves, what amazing critters they are. I mean, it's just, I learn something new all the time. For example, when I split the hive into 2 hives, there was only one queen, and she went with the new hive, and I left half the bees in the old hive queenless. So what? So what the books tell me is that in a matter of only a few hours, the worker bees in that hive will determine that they are queenless, and they will go about now trying to make a new queen. And the way they do that is they go into one of the cells that the queen has recently laid an egg in, and they pull the egg out of that cell, and they construct a new queen cell and deposit that egg in the bottom of the queen cell. and then start feeding it what's called royal jelly. And that's what makes a regular worker egg into a queen. And they'll probably do that with 4 or 5 or 6 eggs just to make sure they get a queen. Well, it's going to take that queen 21 days to emerge from that queen cell. So they're going to be queenless for at least 3 weeks. And then after all the queens, if there are some, and I'll be checking today to find out if they're queen cells, when all the queens hatch, the strongest will survive. The strongest will kill off the other queens that are weaker. And then she, the remaining queen, will leave the hive and fly out for about 5 or 6 days or a week and get mated so that she can lay fertile eggs. So 30 days after I do that split, if everything goes just right, I'll have another laying queen in that first hive. Amazing stuff like that just amazes me. Let's see, what else have I been doing? As you mentioned, I do woodworking. I don't do finish woodworking. I do rough woodworking. I've made all my beehives, for example, in my woodworking shop. And it's something that I really enjoy doing, something that I can use, to fill the time. And it's also something I can use to learn and to create, which is, keeping me young. Anybody else have any questions about Southern Indiana or Arctic or
How did
anything?
you end up getting into Arctic exploration and working at the boot camp there in the Arctic?
Well, I was in the Navy, 6 years active, 14 years reserves. But while I was on active duty, I was a nuclear submarine officer. My submarine was assigned to go up to the Arctic. So I went to the Arctic while I was in the Navy as a lieutenant and got a little bit of experience doing that. I got out of the Navy off of active duty and stayed in the reserves, but went back to work for the Navy as a shipyard engineer. Fairly boring and dull job. But I was in the reserves, and someone in the reserves knew this Arctic submarine laboratory thing in San Diego. I was in Hawaii. Knew that this Arctic submarine lab was looking for someone in Hawaii with Arctic experience that they could hire to be their representative in Hawaii, somebody who could work independently for the Arctic Submarine Laboratory in Hawaii. So they introduced me to the lab and the lab to me, and in a month I was hired on, and 2 weeks after that, I was on a submarine as a civilian trainee on my first adventure to the Arctic on a submarine. So I worked there for quite a number of years, 20-something years, and toward the end of my time there, the last 10 years or so, I was the director of operations for the Arctic Submarine Lab. They promoted me and moved me from Hawaii to San Diego. And so I spent my last time with the lab in San Diego. Now, one of the things Arctic Submarine Lab does 2 things. They supply equipment and personnel to submarines going to the Arctic. It's specialty equipment and specially trained personnel to assist the boat in having a successful trip to the Arctic, because operating in the Arctic is very different from operating out in the Pacific or the Atlantic. The other thing that Arctic Sub Lab does is coordinate, run, establish ice camps. And an ice camp is we leave Dead Horse, Alaska, right on the coast of Alaska, the beginning of the Alaska pipeline, by airplane, and fly out a couple 100 miles and find a great big old piece of ice, usually at least a mile in diameter, hopefully 8 to 10 to 12 feet thick. And we do a landing with a helicopter, with an airplane with skis, and then we begin to bring out equipment and people and build a camp. And what we do that for is, after we get our camp all established, one of the things we provide is a rudimentary tracking system that hangs down from the ice canopy that can listen and help track submarines beneath us. And the Navy will then send up a couple of nuclear submarines to join up with us, underneath us, and run around and play war games, sort of, with each other. Now, the two submarines could do that fine by themselves, but with our assistance, they can get as much done in a couple weeks as it would take them maybe a month to do by themselves. So we assist the submarines, submarine safety and logistics, helping them up there. So I was assigned initially back in the 80s. I was assigned up as a worker at the camp to learn how they ran and to become familiar with it. And then by the time we started having camps in the late 90s and 2000s, I was the officer in charge of the camp. So they would send me up there, and I would have 60 people who worked for me, 2 or 3 aircraft, a couple of helicopters, tons of snowmobiles, and just work with all those folks to make this camp successful and safe and help the submarines do their work. In 2000,
how did that progress into being on Stargate?
When I was living in Hawaii, I liked the Stargate movie. And then when I heard Showtime was coming out with a series featuring MacGyver, I bought Showtime just so I could watch it, and fell in love with Stargate. And then when I was promoted and moved to San Diego, I realized that unlike Hawaii, when you live in San Diego, you can actually drive somewhere else. You couldn't do that in Hawaii. So I was able to, I found out there was going to be a convention in Anaheim, hour and a half or so north, and I went to a Stargate convention in Anaheim. And boy, it was just great. Met so many nice fans and got a few autographs from celebrities and just had a grand time. And at the end of the convention, they announced that the next convention was going to be in Vancouver, and they were going to have set tours. Well, man, I had to be there for that. Yeah. So I went to Vancouver. Now, because my job was unique, I had many photographs of myself in full Arctic gear, standing outside of a nuclear submarine surfaced through the ice in the Arctic. So I picked 4 or 5 of them, and on my printer, printed out some 8x10s, and then I autographed them. And so whenever I stood in line to get an autograph from a celebrity, I would give them an autographed picture of me. And it was sort of like just to be remembered, be unique. And I did that with John Smith, the executive producer. And when I showed him the picture, he asked, what is this picture of? And I told him, well, that's what I do for a living. And he told me that he had been trying to get to the Arctic for many years on one of those Russian icebreakers or some kind of a way to get up there, and wondered if I could get him to the North Pole. And I told him no, but I might be able to get him to an ice camp a few hundred miles south of the North Pole. He pulled a crumpled business card out of his wallet and said, now, if you're serious, you call me. Well, 2 years later, John, working with MGM, and me working with Big Navy, were able to get 18 members. Hey, hi, Lynn.
Hi, Barry. How are you?
Good. I just saw your face pop up. Beautiful. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So 2 years later, I working with the Navy and John working with MGM, we got 18 members of the Stargate production company, along with 7,500 pounds of their gear up to the ice camp that I was in charge of in 2007. And they were there for a week, filming those many scenes you saw in Stargate Continuum. So that's how I got involved with the Arctic, and that's how Stargate got involved with the Arctic. And it was just, that was in 2007. The movie came out in 2008. And in 2009, I participated as officer in charge of my last ice camp. And when I got done with that ice camp in April of 2009, I decided I had been everywhere and done everything. I was 60 years old, and I was eligible to retire. I could afford it. And so 2 months later, I retired after having done everything I could think of and then some with the Navy and with the Arctic. So that's how that worked out.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Barry. Does anyone have any other questions here before we close the chat out?
Well, I did, but I'm trying to remember them basically. Barry, the one thing I was going to mention that I saw, I think, from another Stargate friend, not creation, it was GateCon. Somebody posted yesterday about an Asian hornet being found in Washington State. And that's a deadly enemy to OBs. So I was kind of impressed by that and thought I'd let you know. That's just something interesting I came up with. You can Google it and find it. It had to do.
All right. Well, I'll get out. I'll get out my shotgun and be ready.
Okay. There was something Arctic that I was going to ask. Oh, I remember. Okay. You said earlier that conditions are different in the Arctic than the Atlantic, Pacific, or whatever. What would you say particularly? I'm assuming you're just talking about sub-freezing temperatures and freezing, whatever they deal with underwater there. The Arctic conditions being, how different are they?
Well, there's obvious differences. One is you're operating with a roof over your head. The other is that the water is very, very cold. In fact, seawater doesn't freeze until it gets down to about 28 degrees. So you can be cruising through waters that are 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is below the freezing temperature of fresh water, which means any fresh water that is on the submarine, like drinking water, water that you use for other things, that touches the hull of the submarine, has an opportunity to freeze. So there are so many precautions you need to take on the actual submarine because of the intense cold that stays cold. Interestingly, if you're cruising around at, say, 250 feet in water that's 28 degrees and something freezes, the best way to unfreeze it or to thaw it out is to go deep. Because unlike in the open ocean, where the water gets colder the deeper you go, in the Arctic, the water gets warmer the deeper you go, simply because it is so cold near the surface. The other problem, one of the other problems is that when seawater freezes, it turns to ice. Over a period of time, the salt leaches out of the ice, and it becomes more like freshwater ice. Then in the summertime, when that freshwater ice melts, it pours a great deal of fresh water that sits on top of the salt water and then slowly mixes. So if you get up near the surface and there's open water, you can find yourself in a situation where you have no idea what your buoyancy is going to be, because a submarine feels much heavier in fresh water than it feels in salt water. Not as much stuff to hold the submarine up. And then one more thing, well, acoustics are different. A submarine lives and dies by acoustics. All you do is hear, you don't see when you're on a submarine. And yeah, a sound can emanate miles and miles away and bounce off the ice and then bounce off the seafloor and then bounce off the ice again before you get a chance to hear it. So it's difficult figuring out how far away something is, where something is. The acoustics are much different. And then I think 3 of the 5 largest freshwater rivers in the world empty into the Arctic basin. So near the shore, there are the outflow of fresh water into the seawater, making these giant lenses of fresh water on top of the seawater, which again affects acoustics, affects ballasting. It's just things that most submariners never think about, but when you get up there and you explain it to them, they realize that all the basic things they learned in submarine school come back into play, and they start to think about how the submarine operates basically. And so it's a good learning experience, but without someone there that knows what to expect, it can be a real difficult thing for submarines. That's why Arctic Submarine Lab has us guys that would go up there and help them out.
Well, thank you so much, Barry. You have a great day, and I hope your bees are all right.
All right. Well, I'll post on Facebook for anybody that follows me what the results of my hive inspection are today. And thanks
Awesome.
for anybody who joined. Thanks. It was great to see you, Lynn and Michael and everybody. So thanks for joining. Have a great
Thank you, Barry.
time,
Thank
y'all.
you so much. You take care. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. You too, hon. You too.